Part 3. Keeping the Faith, Protecting American Institutions. Quotes: "Trust is built slowly. Trust is destroyed quickly. Trust can make complex things possible. The absence of trust can make simple things impossible. Trust powers relationships, business, nations. Trust is as precious as it is fragile." The Stoic Emperor. When the trust is compromised, the faith is shaken. Lao Tzu. Chapter 23. All that shines, the gold standard and the money supply.
When we think about money in the modern era, a lot of different things come to mind. There's cash, of course. We might think of bank accounts, credit cards, the stock market, or interest rates. We might also think of Apple Pay, Venmo, or cryptocurrency. But the thing most of us rarely think about is the single most critical aspect of modern money: faith. The only reason you can hand over a small stack of paper bills and walk away with a new pair of shoes is because everyone involved with the transaction believes that the paper cash, fiat currency, has a certain value. You can take an entire cartload of groceries home to your family by waving a piece of plastic or a smartphone near a chip reader, but only because everyone involved in that transaction has faith that numbers in the computer system, digital currency, have certain value and that they will change hands in an orderly and appropriate fashion. Compound interest? It only exists because we believe in it. Most wealth in the modern world exists exclusively in numbers that are stored in computer systems. In other words, our entire fantastically complex modern system of banking and finance is built on faith. Imagine, for just a moment, how much wealth would vanish in an instant if people simply stopped believing in money. The stock market would disappear. Retirement and bank accounts would go poof. Barter would become the medium of exchange, and who knows what you would have to trade for groceries. So if money is an agreed-upon fiction, then how exactly does a nation create it, maintain it, and utilize it? Faith is critical to the entire enterprise, and it's worth remembering two things. 1. Just how hard it has been to build and earn the faith of the people over the centuries, and 2. How important it is to keep that faith. To talk about money is inherently to talk about the money supply and its history in the U.S., which is both fascinating and revealing. Much like the history of taxes, it is riddled with trials, errors, and desperate efforts to stave off economic ruin. To begin with, there are several different ways to define the money supply. Simply put, the money supply is the total amount of money, cash, coins, and balances in bank accounts in circulation. There are several standard measures of the money supply. The sum of currency in circulation and bank reserve balances is the monetary base, MB. Then M1 is the sum of currency held by the public and transaction deposits at depository institutions, a narrow definition. Followed by broader definitions including M2, M3, and MZM. Then there are the questions regarding what size the money supply should be. These are enigmatic and complex decisions for a nation to make. They are based upon several intertwined numbers and parameters, including what standard for money a nation follows, be it gold or fiat. The truth is that the U.S.'s determination of the size of the money supply is one of the most impactful decisions the government can make upon your salary and financial well-being. The size of the money supply and its proper regulation directly affects the achievement of corporate profits, and corporate profits directly affect your salary. Over the course of U.S. history, however, decisions on the size of the money supply have been made without deep analysis. During the Civil War, for example, President Lincoln decided to take the U.S. off the gold and silver, meaning bimetallic standard for money, and instead print fiat currency, not because it was sound monetary policy, but out of desperation. He had to pay for war on a massive scale. This began in 1862, and over the next decade, currency proved to be quite volatile, dramatically rising and sinking in value. Politicians of the 1870s fiercely debated a proper monetary standard for the country, though it is unclear how much mathematical or economic analysis they were provided or was even possible during the time. Ultimately, President Ulysses S. Grant took the nation in the opposite direction when he signed the Coinage Act of 1873, which moved the U.S. away from fiat money and onto an exclusive gold standard. In their attempt to distance themselves from the volatility of fiat currency, lawmakers inadvertently eliminated silver from the U.S. money supply. This mistaken oversight triggered a sharp decline in the price of silver, so much so that many people who owned silver at the time referred to the Coinage Act of 1873 as the crime of 1873. The U.S. then reaffirmed the money supply's commitment of being backed by gold a few years later with the Gold Standard Act of 1900, which fixed the dollar to 23 grains, 1.8 grams of gold, and mandated that the U.S. hold gold bullion to cover 100% of each paper dollar printed so that a citizen could redeem a printed dollar bill for gold, if they desired. One goal was achieved. The currency was stabilized. Citizens were not asked to keep faith in a fiat currency that was backed only by the word of the government and banking institutions. Rather, they could rest easy knowing that a dollar was worth a certain amount of gold residing in the nation's coffers. Even to this day, the gold standard has superfans who yearn to return the nation to this standard. But here's the problem with that approach. If your currency is limited by the amount of gold you hold in your vaults, your money supply cannot grow nearly as fast as your economy, and thus growth and opportunity is strangled for your citizens. Throughout the early 20th century, economic pressure on the gold supply continued to increase. At the same time, there was an enormous strain on the government to raise revenue through taxes, which resulted in the passing of the 16th Amendment and Revenue Act of 1913, which constitutionally established and allowed taxes on income. To address the issues of the money supply, Congress also passed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, which created the U.S. Central Bank, or the Federal Reserve. Congress also reduced the gold bullion coverage requirement to only 40% of dollars printed. This was a step back in the direction of fiat currency, but still only a step, and one that didn't overly strain the people's faith. Still, the restrictions of the gold standard continued to artificially regulate the money supply. Despite the small steps, in the end the money supply continued to be based upon the amount of gold mined and held, with little forethought given on what a proper size for the money supply might be if based upon the actual economy. Then, in 1929, a powerful confluence of events resulted in the stock market crash and the Great Depression. The tight money supply formed from the restrictions of the gold standard was not solely to blame, of course, but it certainly contributed to the overall economic calamity and prevented an effective response. By 1933, as the nation struggled to find answers and resolve its economic doldrums, President Franklin D. Roosevelt suspended all dollar convertibility to gold and reduced gold's value to the dollar. This meant that U.S. citizens, for the first time since 1873, could not take their dollars to the U.S. Treasury and redeem printed bills for gold. It also meant that once again, monetary policy was being created not in a proactive fashion, but in a desperate effort to mitigate serious economic challenges. The country then experienced 10 more years of financial difficulty. By 1945, As the U.S. ramped up the military industry for World War II, the gold coverage for the dollar was again reduced, this time to 25%. Again, there was a dramatic impact on the money supply, with apparently little forethought involving mathematical analysis. These actions were something of a gamble, but resulted in two significant gains, one of which was intentional and one of which was not. The intentional gain was that the U.S. was able to stimulate and expand the money supply to meet economic needs. The unintentional gain was that U.S. citizens took another small step toward faith in the decisions of U.S. institutions, including the eventual decision of introducing the dollar as a fiat currency.